That's part of the process that staff and I have been going through the last week. That well, I guess being the new guy here and not having a whole lot of the past history, there's probably been some poor decisions made in the past, and the water district and its customers are probably paying for them right now, and that's my job, is to help educate the board and the public as to, not necessarily, well, I'll do my best to figure out how we got here, but my problem is where we're at right now, how we move forward and don't repeat history and fix things.
Part of making sure we don't repeat the same mistakes is to understand what they were.
Yeah, exactly. Understood.
If I can maybe just take a second as well, and maybe address a couple of the concerns mentioned. Was early on in the process of actually defeasing some of the bonding. That means getting rid of some money the district had already taken out. They're trying to get rid of debt, reduce that. One of the challenges that the district faces, though, there isn't a lot of growth. That because of the significant growth we saw through 2006, 2007, and even up through 2008, there were things already at that time starting to rear their head. One of the things that we've addressed, or we've talked about in here previously, was, as I mentioned, this peak day capacity. The concerns that we have is when we're running all of our wells at 100% and we're seeing the tanks drop. And when we say, you know what, a couple of days of that is all we can handle. The investment of drilling a new well, unfortunately, is expensive, especially to meet the standards of the state. And unless we're able to find a source that is compliant with EPA regulations, now we're burdened also with the cost of treatment because of the source water. And so those things have all kind of compiled that the district initially began to address those in 2010, but now as those start to compound and we say, okay, we've come from a period of really 1990 to 2000, we saw almost 25% growth, and then double digits all the way up to 2007, 2008. That, yeah, there was a lot of things that we were just trying to keep people watching pipe go in the ground because it was going in faster than we could pay people to get out there and look at it. As we do collect some of that, and as we've looked at a couple of the different pieces of the pie, it's daunting. As Kevin mentioned, though, they're trying, I think, in every sense of the word, to try to save money. We look at what the capital projects are. Most of that is going to be required by new growth, which will be paid by impact fees. And distributing that is probably more art than science. As we look at when is that growth going to come, nobody can tell you. And if they think they can, they're fooling. As that growth comes, though, we intend to structure things so that the growth pays for growth, and try not to encumber that as much as possible on the existing constituents. But as such, trying to make things sustainable from now until growth
So am I generally understanding the basic $1 million a year in capital projects, 1.2 or whatever it is really just to serve existing customers and existing needs, because we expect new.
As we talk about this 5-year plan, yes, most of that is based on a couple of new source capacity to meet our peak day requirements. And beyond that, there's probably a decent gap of most of the projects from there would be required based just on growth. There is some of that is required to meet current needs.
Right, yeah. In a previous report, you had showed to the board on our peak demand stuff. Wasn't that somewhat driven by new regulation or some new standards that the regulatory group had put out on peak demand? Because it's basically peak flow. If a well went down, I mean, there was a complicated chart that you put out to look at our infrastructure.
Don't say complicated. Well, trying to make it easy.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, there were several variables in there.
There was no regulatory body. Essentially, what we're trying.
It was good practice then.
That's yes, and so to go back to that, what we looked at is we said, look, you can meet your current demands, but you have no redundancy in doing so. You have 3 wells right now in the district that provide over 70% of the water. The loss of any one of which would mean that you can't. You'll go to water rationing.
And then that's what happened almost in the beginning of this year when, what was it, well 30 or 31 went down before the north part of town. We just we could have very potentially gone into water rationing because we didn't have
Correct.
redundancy.
And so what we said is, out of good practice, we need to assume an 80%. At any time, we may have 20% of our capacity that is either in repair or latent. And so we'd like to be able to meet peak day production with 80% of our capacity. That's where we said, look, we can't meet that. Today, we're barely meeting it, but if we have one of those wells go down, it will be rationing, and we'll need to be trucking water to certain zones.
July of last year, we ran at 88% of our capacity. So again, if any one of those 3 wells went down,
It would be a couple of weeks worth of repair time and delivery, even expediting those things. And so it's a challenge that just in being prudent, you know, obviously you have some facilities, a hospital, others that receive priority, but in trying to maintain good service, it's just good practice to try to reach those. And that's an existing client service type thing, where others, such as, you know, addressing issues with really most of the growth being in poultry right now, or those types of things, as they pay, they get those projects, and a lot of those are just built into the development as it occurs up there.
But that February failure was pretty catastrophic.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so-
a good thing it happened in February and not in
Right,
July.
right, but that's what I'm saying, but that was a catastrophic failure that we can't, without infrastructure
If
improvements.
if the main line from the well field up north goes down,
Yeah,
we're in serious
Yeah.
trouble. Then we lose, what, 60 or 70% of our production.
That kept me up at night a bit.
well, we had that one line blow in Canyon Crest there, and that was some real, I wasn't, I mean, the water company did an exceptional job of getting the pressure and closing valves and getting pressure to us, but that was a pretty catastrophic eruption there too when that happened.
The challenge that they face is in trying to address this head on, as Kevin and Aaron have, it always costs $2 per dollar for the emergency fix, for the guys to get out there at midnight shutting off valves, and trying to be prudent and prepare for it, knowing it's coming, but at the same time, it can be onerous, and it often appears that way. Especially, this is something that you're the 4th community I've addressed on this that is facing the same challenge: reduced growth right after a period of exponential growth. And when times were good, money was coming and it wasn't an issue. We were all drinking the punch, but now we're left with an empty punch bowl.
All right, Mike, I've just got one question on the 2010 rate study. Do I recall that we had to raise, are we in compliance with that rate study at that time? Were we supposed to raise our rates?
What we did, I mean, 36% was heavy.
Yeah.
And that was scary.
I understand that.
The concern we had was the effect that it would have, and for that reason we said no capital projects, which, yeah, it's going on 3 years now of the 5 years we intended. We had not assumed conservation. We didn't want to factor that in. We said we'll make up the difference with cash reserves. The board tried to soften that blow as much as they could in making those assumptions.
Yeah, we did.
Unfortunately, though, like I said, even with such a stiff rate hike, what you saw was significant conservation, 9%, which meant, and that 36% was even after we had defeased the bond, and I think the board had done everything possible to reduce
I don't know
whatever
of
they could
anything
do.
else we could.
And what we're seeing is that growth has continued to taper, and that some of those items have continued to stay level, or actually items have increased. But it's unfortunately one of the demons of being a solely groundwater with no surface water source. Every time you get a power rate, I mean, as much as I look at these capital projects thinking, man, I'm glad that's not coming out of my wallet, but when I know even just to start up a well, it can be anywhere from $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to flip the switch. And you realize it's difficult to keep this running and balance it and make it sustainable.